this little thing. This is the BLTouch. It is electromagnetic, so it's got a little magnetic coil in here, and it's got some circuitry on the back that you can't really see because I've got it mounted right now. And what it does is it goes in fact, let me turn it on and see if it'll go through its startup routine. So that was its little self-check where it initializes to make sure that it's actually able to extend and retract the little probe that's on it. This is the version 3.1, although they all look very similar. You have to actually look at the back of them to see what version they are. And it does matter, not just because it's newer, but the newer ones, version 3 and up, which are pretty much the ones that I've seen on sale now, are slightly different to install than some of the older ones on the firmware side of things. And so, you'll find lots of different, I searched for like guides for installing these, and there's a lot of different information out there. Some of these will even say, well, they might not say BLTouch if they're, if they're trying to not be an obvious copy. But there are other things that look exactly like that that may work a little bit differently. And so you just have to be careful with following guides, because the guides can get out of date pretty quickly. In fact, some of the ones I looked at were already out of date. And the other complicating thing is that not only does the BLTouch iterate relatively quickly for a piece of hardware, but the firmware, Marlin or whatever you're running, iterates even faster. So you'll find a guide that says it's the exact thing you need to do, and then when you go to make changes in the firmware, those changes are not in the same place anymore, or they're not there at all. And so there are a lot of different things that you have to keep in mind when you're upgrading one of these things. You have to do a little bit of legwork on figuring out exactly what to do. So I'll walk you through what I did for this one. And well, let me show you which one I did buy. Let's see. I got one off of Amazon. I got this one over here, the ANTClabs. I don't know how you say that, but that word. That's the original BLTouch, and there are, well, you can see 3D Touch, so that's a knockoff one, and there's a Creality branded one. And so there are others out there that, are probably as good. Some of them are not as good, and so you just have to be careful on which one you're getting. I will say that the one I got, it would have been a little better to get maybe one of these kits over here, and I'll show you why in a second. They're a little bit more expensive. Like this one's $38, and these are $56. The difference is, you notice there's more pieces over here. The bracket's not a big deal. I just printed one, so I just printed this gray bracket right here. It was on Thingiverse. There's a lot of them. It was this one right here. It was a super easy print. I did print it. There's no actual need for it to be strong, but I printed it with all top layers and everything. So it's pretty dense, and it came out really nice. But so you don't really need the bracket. But the other thing that's in here is this little piece. Let's see if I can zoom in on it. Oh, there we go. That little piece. Well, actually, maybe that one would be more useful. What these are doing are, when you go to attach, this is for the Ender 3. So if you're on a different printer, this particular piece is not necessarily needed. But when you go to attach this thing electronically, so plug in the wires, on the Ender 3, the board that it's using doesn't have a spot for it to plug in. And so you'll see what I did. I just wired it in. But there are these little adapters that basically let it plug into an existing plug-in on the board, and then go and plug in your BLTouch. I got around that with just cutting a wire and wiring it in myself, but maybe you don't want to do that. But you'll see in a second what that does. So what I did get is, well, scrolled off the screen now. This one, I did get the one that has the 1 meter extension cable. So these little leads that are coming off of the BLTouch are only like 5 inches long or so. You know, they're going from the BLTouch just a little ways. There will no way that they're going to reach the motherboard of your deal. So they're like, they end right up there. And so they got to make it all the way down into the box at the bottom. And so the 1 meter one is pretty much the shortest that you could get that will make that trip and still give you full travel. So it can go all the way to the top of your print and all the way to the right side. So if you have anything shorter than that, it's not really going to make it very easily. You could, so the kit, the one that I did get, this kit, it comes with more than this actually. I don't know if it's going to show over here the other piece. No, it just shows this right here. It actually comes with more than this, and there are some longer extension cables, 2 meter. No extension cable, it's actually the same price as the 1 meter one, so just get the 1 meter one. It came with parts to actually make an extension cable if you wanted to, so it came with the little connectors on the end and the inserts for those connectors. So if you wanted to, you can make it exactly whatever length you wanted. That's probably a little more than you want to deal with for, there's no difference in the price on this particular one anyway. So before you do, well, at some point in the process, you do have to have your Ender 3 set up with a bootloader. So that's a whole nother process. You have to be able to upload firmware to it, basically. And there are pretty decent guides out there on how to get the firmware bootloader installed. Basically, you need an Arduino, which you should probably already have, and some wires to connect your Arduino to the board of the printer. These style wires right here. These kind of things. So if you have those, whatever ends they have, I've taken the ends off of those. Then you can basically create jumper wires over to your Ender 3 motherboard from the Arduino. Get in the Arduino IDE and create a bootloader on the Ender 3 on the printer, and that way you can then connect through USB to your computer to your printer and upload firmware to it. So you do have to do that. I've already done that on this printer, so it's ready to accept firmware, but that is something that you have to accomplish before any of the other stuff works. Most of the other printers out there, you don't have to do that step. That's already, you just plug them in and they're ready to go. But the Ender 3 doesn't have that ready to go. At least the current versions don't. What else did I get? That's the only pieces I bought. So let's look at what happens over here. Over here, got the Ender 3. I printed this little mount. It came with those screws you see there. So these screws, it came with those. It actually came with washers. I didn't put them on there. It did not come with the screws to mount the bracket to the plate that the print head is mounted to, but the ones that were already there were long enough. They're really short, but they were long enough to go through the bracket and hold the fan shroud and all that, and the bracket all onto the mounting plate. So I didn't have to get any hardware there. Then you route, I just zip tied it. So it would probably be nicer to be in this wire loom, but for now it's just on the outside. I didn't want to go through the effort of unlooming everything and then inserting the cables for the BLTouch and all that, but I just zip tied it to that same loom, and then it runs down to this box. There's a screw in the back. I've already taken it out, and then you take these two off. I did run the wires under everything, so they're actually going through the bottom of this, and there's a gap in the back where the other wires go through, and I just put the BLTouch wires in the same gap. And then if I can get this screw out, we'll open this up. Maybe it's already. Yeah. Oh, and assuming you save your tools, it did not come with any tools, but they're the same tools that you use to assemble the printer, so you should still have them. All right. Now, there's a fan attached to this, so it's not going to go too far. Now we got to get down in here. So this LCD cable, let's see if I have something to point with. Anything? Yeah, use the highlighter. All right. The LCD cable right here, this is cable that's running over to your control panel for your printer. It has a pin 27, is inside that cable. In fact, it's the one that would normally, this wire would normally be bonded to this ribbon cable. I separated it because that's the wire that goes to pin 27. It is controlling the buzzer, so the little sound speaker on your printer is normally controlled with this pin here. The BLTouch is going to use that as its control pin, so you will have lost your buzzer, because what I did is here's the other end over here. I just would be the buzzer, but I snipped it and patched in this yellow wires from the BLTouch. I patched it into there. I did put some electrical tape on it, but I actually used these connectors, so it will be easy to unplug and plug the buzzer back in if I ever want to. So I didn't actually solder it or anything. It's just plugged together with these. That's why these are missing some. And then the red and brown wires, those are the power wires, and there are little headers. In fact, the same little headers that you would need to plug into for uploading your bootloader. They have a power and ground, and the BLTouch actually had one of these connectors that was 3 wide, because it had the yellow, the brown, and the red all stuck together. But the package that I got did include some separate ones. So these are possible to remove. So let's see if we can even get close enough to see what's going on in there. It's going to be kind of, all right. Oh. So these little silver tabs are on the ends. So the little ends have silver tabs in there. And so the plastic sheath kind of slides over that. To get them to release, you have to pull up. You're not going to be able to see it on the video, but you have to pull up a little black plastic tab here. You pull it up. I used an X-Acto, and then you can slide them apart. And to put them back together, you just slide them together, and they snap together. So I did that with the connectors in here, down in here. So they were all stuck together. I pulled the wires out and put them into individual ones. The individual ones did come with the BLTouch that I bought. Then the Z end stop. So normally your printer has this thing on it, right? So it has a little mechanical switch that gets triggered whenever the Z axis moves down, and it's plugged in with here. It's plugged in onto the board with all the other end stops. So they're actually on this one. They're labeled these little yellow. You can't really quite see them very well, but these little yellow plastic pieces are telling me which one's X, which one's Y, and this one was Z. I actually pulled. So Ender does go in and hot glue everything. You can kind of see some of it here. They basically drop hot glue all across here and onto this connector and on this one. That's good because it's not going to rattle loose or anything, but when you want to unplug it, you got to cut that hot glue out. So I did have to get an X-Acto in here and cut some hot glue off of here to get the ribbon cable out. Actually, I didn't need to unplug this one. That little part I showed you earlier, what it does is you unplug this ribbon cable, plug the part in, and then that part allows you to just take that 3 wide header from the BLTouch and plug it into the part. See if we can find it again. Right here. So it lets you plug into the ribbon cable. Well, not really ribbon cable. The one from the BLTouch plugs into this little adapter. The adapter plugs into where the LCD screen plugs in, and then the LCD screen plugs into the adapter. So you don't have to cut anything, you just plug it all in. I didn't have one of those. I did go order one later, but I didn't have one yesterday. So I just interfaced with pin 27 manually, with cutting it apart. The Z in stop, I actually unplugged the socket and the Z in stop. So I completely removed the Z in stop that's normally on the printer, just because I don't want it, because it's not going to do anything. The only thing that it possibly could do is get in the way of the Z-axis moving. So I just completely removed it. You at least need to lower it down if you don't want to take it off of the printer. But you're not going to have a place to plug it in, because it should plug in here. And so I just completely removed it and the socket, and plugged in the white and black wires from the BLTouch. Now, when I first did this and got the firmware uploaded and everything, when I went to home the printer, it moved upwards. So the Z-axis moved upwards. Whenever the BLTouch detects some kind of malfunction, its response is it's going to move up. Not very far, but maybe a centimeter to an inch or something like that, because it thinks that something's going wrong and it doesn't want to crash into the bed, so it's moving up. And so to fix that, I flipped these wires the other direction. So actually, I didn't flip it here. I actually flipped it where it plugs in at the other end of the cable, but it's the same effect. So apparently it should have been the black wire on this side and the white on the bottom side. But once I did that, then it operated the right way. So then you're done with the box, and put it back. I'll screw it back together in a minute. And then what happens is, let's show you what happens when you run this thing. So let's look at the BLTouch. It's probably going to go off the screen, so it'll come into focus in a little bit. So I'm just going to do a home and see if it works. All right, so it's home in X right now. It just homed Y. It was almost in the Y position. Here it goes to home Z. So it'll come down into view in a second here. All right, there it goes. So it has extended that little probe, and hopefully when it touches the bed, the probe will touch the bed first. All right, so it triggered it, and then it goes back and it moves a little bit slower, not much slower. You can change how fast it goes, but it's doing the sensing now. Now the red light is on. That's just basically showing that the probe is retracted. So it's doing. There are several versions of these. There are some no contact ones that are just capacitive, so they just sense the bed itself, like object detection. Those work well. That's what the Prusa has on it, and it seems to work fine. They do have a little bit of issue in that, like if you want to have a glass bed, but they may not have the range to penetrate through the glass and get all the way down to usually they're detecting the metal surface. They're not like proximity of anything sensors. Usually they're capacitive, and so they need that metal layer to detect. And sometimes they have a tough time getting that much range. This one doesn't have a glass bed, so it's fine. It would have worked on there. You do get slight changes in detection height with temperature changes and humidity changes even. So they can be a little bit from day to day, a little bit different, but they do work pretty well, and there are better and worse ones of them. There are other styled mechanical switches. You could technically, the oldest printers, not the oldest printers, but the older versions of this stuff basically used a mechanical switch like this one on a servo, and the servo would swing it down, and it would go around and tap on the bed with just a switch like this that closes mechanically, and it would accomplish a similar thing. It's not the BLTouch is more sensitive basically than something like this. This one gets triggered at different ranges, different type days of the week, and different seconds even. So the BLTouch is I like it the most as far as the ones that are out there right now, just because it is relatively accurate. So this little test print, this is on Thingiverse. Let's see, this test print right here. is basically one. There's a lot of different versions of these, but it's basically one that covers most of the bed, and you can kind of get an idea if you have high or low spots. This little blob over here is where it ended, and actually it wanted to make another layer on top of this one. I shut it down, and that's where it just kind of oozed. So that blob is not a defect in it. And so you can go in and kind of see if you have any high or low spots in the bed, and the BLTouch did not account for them. In this case, it looks like everything was accounted for and printing pretty well across most of the bed. So that's what that is. I just haven't scraped it off of there. This little tape over here, this is part of setting up the BLTouch, because your firmware basically needs to know where is the sensor, the probe, in relation to your nozzle. So I just stuck some masking tape onto the bed directly, drew out where the nozzle was, and then where the probe was. So like basically drove them over this spot, and then marked where each one of them were and measured these distances. So 12 millimeters and negative 40. Well, this is actually negative 12. I didn't write negative, but it's negative 12 because it's in front of the nozzle, and negative 42 millimeters because it's to the left of the nozzle. And so that locates the probe. You do have to also go in different firmwares. It's different ways to do this, but you do have to go in and say how high above in the Z direction is your probe when it triggers. On this particular version, it's going to be done on the printer screen itself. So you need those numbers because they fit, depending on what bracket you print and how you mount the BLTouch, those numbers are going to be unique to your setup, potentially. I suppose if you used exactly the same bracket, you'd be pretty close with these numbers. And then, let's see, what did it do next? Nothing happened. So just mounting it and plugging it in doesn't actually do anything. It won't. I don't even know if it would work as a in-stop without firmware changes. I didn't actually test that. It might, but I wouldn't believe that it would. I assume it wouldn't do anything. So then you have to go and upload some firmware. Remember, when you're uploading firmware, that whatever you have on there currently is going to be completely overwritten. So you may have made all these changes, maybe tuned baby stepping just the way you want it, maybe a custom loading screen, all that kind of stuff. That's all going to be overwritten when you put new firmware on there. So you probably should make sure that you're saving the firmware, particularly the one that you like, because otherwise you're going to download a blank copy, a generic copy, and then have to customize everything again. This one didn't have anything on it that I was really worried about keeping, so I just got a whole new version. I did the unified firmware, TH3DUF from right here. I did this one, the Release 2A1 version, and it has some things built into it that let the 3.1 BLTouch work pretty easily. There's a 1, 2, 3, 4. I changed 5 lines. Actually, I changed 5 lines in one configuration file, and I think I also changed some in the advanced configuration file. I'll look at that in a second. And so it's not terribly difficult to get this software to work with the BLTouch and your printer. Oh no, I just used this one. This one does all this Easy Able. That is their version. This place also has a store where they sell their own sensors and all kind of different things. So let's see. So they have their own setup of sensors and rigid mounts for the bed, camera mounts, all this kind of stuff. So a lot of the Easy Able type references you'll see refer to this company's products. But they also have support for BLTouch in there. So I downloaded this. It comes in a zip package over here. I extracted it, and you get this. So we're going to open that. It's a folder in a folder. There are a lot of different things in here. There's STLs for mounting brackets for their products. I think there's even STLs for leveling blocks and rigid mounts so you don't use springs. One thing nice about the BLTouch is that you could now go in and rigidly mount your bed to the little platform that it's on, so that you don't have to worry about springs at all. So the springs I have on here are pretty tight. You don't want the springs on the bed very loose. You want them pretty tight, but rigid is even better than pretty tight. So there are some STL files. I think they're maybe in here. Well, maybe not. They're in here somewhere. I saw them. I don't know if that's it or not. Gantry block doesn't sound like the right one. But anyway, there's some in here somewhere that will rigidly mount, and they're just cylinders. So you could make your own. But once you have that, then it doesn't really matter if the bed is perfectly flat. You're not using the knobs to adjust it. You're using it to be flat, more or less in position. And then the BLTouch is taking care of any slight imperfection. You don't want the BLTouch to just take care of these, there's a centimeter difference between one side and the other side's height. You don't want that, because that just causes your Z-axis to run unnecessarily. So you want everything as flat as you can be, and let the BLTouch take care of any warped shapes or anything like that. I watched a little experiment the other day where they basically mounted a probe on the print head itself. So they mounted it over here and tracked, and it was reading out distance, so distance from the bed. And they tracked the distance from the bed as all they changed is heated up the bed. And there was a 0.3 millimeter difference between cold bed height and hot heated bed height. And they were only going to like 50 degrees or something, so not even your normal temperature for your bed that you're printing at, although 50 is fine. And so that 0.3 millimeters doesn't sound like a lot, but that's more than your layer height usually. Usually your layer height is like 0.2 millimeters. So all of those little changes that happen will affect, basically they're going to affect the first few layers and the part sticking to begin with. And so if you can eliminate as much of that as possible, then you'll get better results, particularly on the first couple of layers and the part just sticking to the print bed at all. So that's what it's doing for you. When you're printing small things, it's probably not going to make that big a difference. It's when you're printing a larger part that has to cover, more of the bed, like what we've got here. And this part over here might have a hole in it compared to this side over here. And if you print everything in the same plane, then the part over here is going to have a hard time sticking, or the part over here is going to be really smushed down and may jam your extruder. So the BLTouch tracks the height of the bed. Now, it doesn't do that live. It does it before the print. So if I were to start a print, it will go in, and why don't we start one? I've probably got one on here. And it'll take a while for it to actually start because it'll have to heat everything up. Let's take this off. But I'll start it now, and then whenever it starts doing its thing, we'll come and look at it. I don't want all this in the way. We'll leave the mat. Well, I don't guess we need this anymore. All right, so let's print that, and then we'll watch its startup routine whenever it gets ready to. It'll take a while. In the meantime, let's look at this firmware stuff. So I'm in this folder. All right. Like it has all this different stuff. It does have a folder called firmware, but what this one does is it actually has this is a larger download, like 300 megabytes or something. It's not just the firmware. There's a lot of other stuff in here. And it actually has open firmware in Windows, a batch file for that. So it expects you to run that, and it's going to open its own light version of the Arduino IDE that's set up the way they want it to be set up to install this firmware. So here we go. Let's see. You want to make sure for the Ender 3 that you're on the Sanguino. That's what its motherboard is operating as, not the regular Arduino Uno. Whatever port you're on, I guess we're on COM3, although it may have, no, we're not plugged in at all. Let's plug that thing in. Let's see if we get, oh, we may lose our, oh no, it showed up, it just didn't ding. All right, COM5, I think everything else, we might have to change to that one. We'll leave it this way for now. So again, it's got a lot of different folders across the top and down here. We only need to look at the one called configuration.h, and then maybe the advanced one. We'll look at it in a second. So in the configuration.h, how this unified one works is there are a lot of different printers already set up in here. So there's some Creality Ender 2 and there's Ender 3. So they're all commented out, I believe they're all commented out to begin with, and you go uncomment the one that your printer is. So you have to uncomment Ender 3 because you're on Ender 3. And then custom probe. So here's the easy out enable and all these different probe mounts and everything. We're not using their actual product, so we're going to do a custom probe. So BLTouch counts as custom probe. We're going to, remember we plugged in, or I wired in the BLTouch to pin 27. We need to tell the software that, hey, this custom probe that we're using is going to operate off of pin 27. So you have to add in, define. I think there's actually a line in here that you can uncomment. I just don't want to go find it. I'm just going to add it in. Servo 0 is going to, pin is going to be 27. So that sets the pin 27 as the pin that's going to talk to the BLTouch. Let's see, I think shortly after here we have to search for it. Yeah, let's go ahead and search for it because I don't want to find it. Let's see, no. Oh, right here. So this Easy Able, even though we're not using the actual Easy Able hardware, this does still control the number of points in your grid. So right now it's set to 3. That's kind of the normal one. What that does is it goes in and probes 9 different times on the bed. Let's see if we're close to this thing. Did I never tell it to start? I never told it to start. All right. So 3 is a 3x3 grid. So it'll do 3 points across the middle, basically the front left corner, the middle front, and the front right corner. Then it goes to the middle row, probes 3 times, and then the back row 3 times. And so you can set this to, I don't know what the maximum is, but you could change it to whatever number you think is good for your bed. Obviously, the more numbers you put here, then the more time it will take before your print. Oh, all right, so let's switch over to see what it's going to do. So it homed X, homed Y, and it's going to go in, they extended the probe. It's fine, and this is just homing Z right now. This isn't the probing routine. It's actually going to start up here. All right, oh well, so now all right, here's the probing. So it's probing the front left corner, and it basically does this in a pattern of, it's set to 3 right now, so 3x3. So you get 9 points. If you want more detail in your mesh, so basically these are 9 vertices that will become a grid, and each one is recorded a different height. So it's roughly mapping the shape of this bed, but with only 9 points. And I do have it set to a bilinear interpolation, so it uses these points in a polynomial basically to create a digital map of the bed. And then that digital map is used on the first couple of layers. I didn't even look to see how many layers it's using to control the Z-axis moving up and down as you print. Hopefully, the bed's pretty flat and everything. It should be heated up. Yes, it's heated up. If the bed is not heated while you're doing this, then it will change between, if you have a cold bed and you'll probe it and then you heat it up and print on the hot bed, it won't be the right map. So you do need the bed heated while you're doing this probing. Otherwise, it's going to be different once you start printing. assuming you're using a heated bed to print. You could just use a cold bed to print PLA. So it's almost done. Now I think this startup G code has a purge in it, so it might spit out a whole bunch of filament here in a second. I don't remember if I put that on there or not. So it's good. Now it has a map of the bed in in its brain. So it's going in, it's heating the extruder because there's no reason to at this point heat the extruder because you can get the probing done sooner if you go ahead and do that. The thing that needs to be heated is the bed. The extruder doesn't actually have to be heated for this version. If you're doing manual leveling, then yes, they both need to be heated because the extruder would also change shape. But if you're doing this, you're not using the height of the nozzle, you're using the height of the probe. So it can be cool, although it's almost heated up now. So it's got a few degrees to go, and then it'll start the print. And then I'll show you what you might have to do. For some reason, I made this print at 215, so it's going to take longer to heat to it. All right, so it's probably going to do its purge line. I think it does 2 purge lines actually. It does this one and moves over and does another one. And then I think it might do another purge off to the side. I can't remember now. Yeah. So what it's doing right now is it's in the startup code for the profile. I don't actually need that in there, I don't think, but it's in there. So it's just reload. Basically, it's reloading filament. All right. Oh, on the screen it was asking me if I was ready. All right, so now what you have is it says map the bed. It's doing a skirt right now. It's not actually doing the print, but see, it's not sticking. So it knows the bed map, but it doesn't have a Z position. It doesn't know how high it needs to be there. So you have to go in. Oh. Well, where did they put it? Huh. Oh, did I? I think I originally had baby stepping as a double click, and I don't have it anymore now. So where is it? You have to change the Z height, and oh, there it is. All right. So we want it to be closer to the bed because it's not sticking. And I think I actually had measured it, and it's down in the -2 range or something. And so you're watching on the print. You can't see it right now because it's behind the nozzle. So it's sticking better. It's still a little bit high, and so here you're setting the Z height basically. And you basically want something, oh, that's too close. So right there where it's too thin, like you can see through it, it is printing, but it's too close. And so I raised it back up a little bit. Raise it a little more. So I'm at negative 2.175 is what I'm at. And so basically that's the difference between where the probe triggers and the nozzle actually is. So you can go in and beforehand try to measure that so you know more or less where it's at. And then you want to store those settings so that you don't have to do it every time. Actually still looks a little bit close. It's really transparent, which it would stick really well, but what that'll do is it'll squish out the bottom of your print. So if you're trying to make something that's relatively accurate, it's going to have a squished out bottom that won't interface well with the other pieces. All right. So it'll do the rest of its print over there. We didn't finish changing our firmware though. So the 3 here is those 3 points in 3 rows. So it's a grid. You can change that to whatever number you want. It will just increase or decrease. Or, you know, if you do less than 3, then you're probably not going to get much of a map. Basically, you can just get how is it tilted. If you do too many, then it's going to take, you know, longer to probe all those points. So you do pick whatever you want there. I also changed, so there are speeds of how fast is it going to probe the bed, you know, how fast is it going to move the z-axis down. I left all of them as the default they have here. It's a little bit fast probably, but it's okay. Here, this little diagram right here is trying to show you where they're talking about measuring from. So this is what I had on the masking tape. I had a X distance of negative 42 and a Y distance, I think it was 12, negative 12. I took it off of there. So in front of the nozzle is negative, so negative 12. There's some firmware have a Z right under here where you can put that negative 2 in there. This particular one only has X and Y, and it does the Z through the control panel. What other things did I changed? One other thing, but I think it might be in the advanced. Let me. Yeah, I don't see it. So then in the configuration.advanced, I went in and searched for fix underscore. So, oh no, that might have been in backend that I did that. Yeah, it was. So not in configuration advanced, configuration backend. So there's this fixed mounted probe. I changed all of those references to BLTouch. So I basically found fixed mounted probe and replaced them with BLTouch. And I think there's like 4 of them. So I did that. 3 of them, I guess. And then I think also in here there are some different rates for offs. You know, how fast is it deploying? How fast is it homing? Things like that. There's also a 5-volt power that I'm not seeing right now. All of these others were the way they needed to be. Well, so all these PID tunings, they're going to be generic. You know, they're not going to necessarily be the tunings that you would need. These are the defaults for different printers. They would be using these. There's the Wanhao, and there's one of their printers. And so yours would use these settings. So these probably you would need to go in and set your PID tuning to be whatever yours need to be. These will work. It's just they won't be ideal for your setup. I did not change those on mine. I wasn't worried about it. The only other thing I changed was a power setting to 5-volt mode, although it worked fine without it on, so I think you could leave it the way it is and it worked fine. I don't see it now anyway. All right, so then you save your version and you upload it to your Arduino just like you would your printer, just like you would any other Arduino code. And that still doesn't do anything though. All that does is it gets your firmware capable of dealing with the BLTouch. To actually use the BLTouch, you have to go to your slicer. So we got to find Cura. It's the one I'm using, whatever you're using. There's the print that we're printing. Looks like it's doing fine. Oh, it's going to be tiny on this screen. All right, so you go into Manage Printers. If you're in Cura, you go into Manage Printers. You pick the one you're working on. It's reasonable. All right. So they've got some codes in here about setting the bed temperature because you do need the bed to be on before you want to start probing it, because it's going to deform once you heat it up. So they do heat up the bed. They start the extruder to go ahead and warm. Remember, there is a setting for start a temperature change, but you don't have to wait for it to actually get to this temperature change. And then there's another G-code command for wait for it. So the 104, M104 is, hey, start the extruder, go into temperature 160, but carry on with your G-code. The 109 should be, the 109 is, okay, now the extruder actually has to get to whatever print temperature you're at. So it's grabbing that from Cura in this case, versus being hard-coded in there. So the 109 is actually don't do anything until the extruder gets up to that temperature. So G28 is home everything, so that's the normal thing that's in there. So that goes in and does the home X, home Y, and it does use the probe to home Z. It's going to home Z in the center now though, whereas before it might not have moved over to home Z, but it is important that the BLTouch go to the center of the bed to home, otherwise it might be off the bed, when it's trying to home and it never touches anything. So that's pretty normal. But here's the G29 command. That's the one that goes in and actually tells it to follow whatever's in your firmware to do the different points, the 3 different points times 3 mesh leveling. Without the G29 command in there, then it will not do the mesh bed leveling. It'll just go through and do the regular print. So it'll do the regular home, X, Y, and Z, but it won't do the mesh bed leveling. So you have to add at least that in there. All this other stuff is like, here's the purge line, here's another purge line. Well, actually, here's the other purge line. And then, yeah, all these are just moving and setting temperatures. But it's that G29 that you have to add in the startup code, or else it won't do the mesh bed leveling. Once you get all of those things done, so you've mounted the thing, you've wired it in, you've changed your firmware, you've put the G29 into your startup G-code, then when you go to slice and print something, it will finally do the auto bed leveling and go in and print your part. Ideally, it doesn't do anything. Ideally, your bed is perfectly flat and it's flat and level, or at least level compared to your gantry, and the z-axis never even has to move for warping or anything. But if your bed is warped at all, then it will go in and attempt to mitigate those warps in your bed. And it looks like it's doing a decent job. I don't know why we need to keep printing on this. We can probably cancel it now, but it did get all of these things to stick down. There's no brim on any of them. They're not very tall, so they probably aren't subject to warping and peeling off the bed anyway. Next, you would want to print something that you've been having trouble with and see if it does better. So that is more or less how you get BLTouch installed, up and running, what it does. And again, like I said, there are other versions of sensors like this that aren't the BLTouch. There's capacitive ones, and there are proximity sensors, and there's a variety of different sensors. I kind of think the BLTouch is consistently the best one because it does have a mechanical response versus something that depends on a phenomenon that might change with different properties, air properties. The downside of the BLTouch is, I guess I closed it. Oh, well, it is that the probe itself eventually will fail. It is a mechanical device, so eventually it will fail. And if it ever probes, off the bed, or maybe you accidentally code it in a way to where the little probe hangs on something, then it can bend it a little bit. It is plastic. The old ones were metal, but it is plastic, so it is relatively easy to straighten it back out. But if you ever have physical issues with colliding the BLTouch into something, then it's not going to work the same after that, and so you do have to go get a new one. Good thing is, the next time, other than having to pay for a new one, it's relatively easy to install. You just unplug it and bolt it in, so it's not a big deal the second time you install it.